Hello chat friends and welcome to Tarrasch Chess channel and welcome back to our Queen's Gambit Decline series. So in this series we're following this very nice opening from White's and from Black's perspective, and today we continue with our Queen's Gambit Decline series and the Tarrasch Defense. The Tarrasch Defense we have explained so far with some classical systems, but we have seen also some sharp gambit lines that can happen in the Tarrasch Defense. But today we're analyzing really sort of a positional idea of Black, which is the so-called Wagner Variation. The Wagner Variation is sort of an idea in which Black is trying to give up the bishop for a knight and then to have the center closed, because of course you know that the knight loves the close game. So that's why the positional trades of pieces idea of Blacks is actually the main goal. But in my opinion, the Wagner variation is actually not the best of variations that Black can play. So that's why we are analyzing now the Tarrasch Defense and the Wagner variation a little bit more from White's perspective, because actually in this video I'm going to show you how you can beat the Wagner variation with three methods. I think there are three great methods how to beat the Wagner variation, and I'll show of course all of them, because in my opinion the Wagner variation is sort of a line that basically Black should try to avoid. There are plenty beautiful attacking lines that Black can play, but okay, you may get annoyed by the Wagner variation move that I'll show you of course, and then if that happens you should not panic because nothing is going on. If you play the next couple more moves very well, I think then you have a really beautiful game. So let's check out now what is the Tarrasch Defense, what is then the Wagner variation of this beautiful opening. So here d4 is of course our main move, d5, c4, the Queen's Gambit. After move e6 we have the Queen's Gambit declined, and now after move knight to c3 now comes the Tarrasch Defense move, which is of course the move c5. And okay, again I'm recommending you here simply to take c takes d5, undermining the pressure in the center of the board. So in order to get a better understanding what's going on the board after e takes d5, please check out my Tarrasch Defense from the beginning, so from introduction video part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4 and so on, because in that videos we have explained really the most important strategical and tactical ideas for both sides. So that's why we're not explaining basically everything here. Here we're analyzing only now the new variation, which is as I said, the Wagner variation. After move e takes d5 we have normal development, knight to f3, knight to c6, we have g3, knight to f6, and after bishop to g2 now comes the Wagner variation move, which is now the move bishop to g4. And many of us I think would start to panic because what you do now, the knight is hanging here on f3. The knight is the key protector of the d4 square. You don't want to play of course knight to e5, the pawn on d4 is then hanging. Some of us would try maybe some passive idea and bad ideas. This is not the best of ways how to proceed here. Many of us would try maybe even the move e3, but all of these ideas are basically bad because you're simply worried too much about the square d4, which you should not do here in the Wagner variation from White's perspective. There are now three great methods how to play here around the square d4, but also around the square d5, because the best ways actually how to proceed here are moves like bishop to e3, bishop to g5, and also knight to e5 is still a good move here for White. So the move knight to e5 we're analyzing first because I think it's the sharpest line, and in my opinion it's really the most beautiful line, and you can be the judge really of any of these lines, so you can choose what you're trying to play. If you want to play maybe here these types of methods against the Wagner variation. So first we're analyzing of course the move knight to e5, and it seems so that something went wrong because the pawn is hanging on knight to d4, but the problem is this particular line. Knight to g4 happens, you take knight takes g4, and now with the move e3 we have a double attack here. The knight is hanging on d4 but also the knight on g4, so it's game over here for Black. So that's why you should not be worried, as I said. After move bishop to g4, then still you can play knight to e5 and everything is perfectly fine. So what Black could do here in the after move knight to e5, Black could maybe take out here the knight on e5, but again it's not such a good idea, because after d takes e5 you see the pawn structure is really messed up in the center of the board. We have now a beautiful attack, the attack has opened here around the square d5. So in order to keep some kind of a good game, Black would probably play the move d4, but we can simply take, it's not a problem. We can play e takes f6 here from White's perspective, d takes c3, but now comes a beautiful move queen to a5. a4. You see we have a beautiful check and also an attack against the bishop. So that's why in order to keep your bishop on the board, you have to play bishop to d7. But now with queen to b3, we have now a new attacking motif. We have a new attacking target, which is now the weak square b7. So in order again to prolong the game a little bit, black could try maybe queen to f6, but we can simply take because the rook is hanging. Now rook to d8, and now after castling, even if black tries something like c takes b2, nothing dramatically is going on because still we can take. The queen is connected with the bishop, and now from this point on, here I think white has a comfortable game. The king is in the center. We can include now all of the pieces into the game. The bishop can come into the game, the rook can come into the game, so black is simply again tactically lost. So see the beauty of after move knight to e5, knight takes e5 is not working. Here also knight takes d4 is not working. So here what black could do is here maybe the move c takes d4, undermining the pressure in the center of the board, which is basically the best move now for black. Black should play this move. What you should not do, and this is now first example what you should not do from white's perspective, is a game here played by Lev Pashkish against Judith Polar, in which Lev Pashkish took here the knight on c6. That's not the way to go. Here you should simply take out the bishop. Here you can take knight takes g4, because after knight d takes c3, pardon me, here you still have the opportunity to take out the knight. It comes with a check. After queen to f6 we have b takes c3, and now after queen to c3 you still can cover, and now after something like queen to f6 and castling, I think that white is here really comfortable game. We can notice first of all that the d5 pawn is very weak. Also the b7 pawn is very weak, and the problem is also the lack of development of blacks. The bishop has to develop somewhere, so at least you need 2 more tempi in order to secure the king. Let's see, maybe you play something like bishop to c5, then you get challenged, you have to maybe cover, and now bishop to d5. You see now with the bishop pair on the board, with such an open game, with still an asymmetrical pawn structure, with potential 4 versus 3 pawn majority attacks here on the king side, I think that white is here really a beautiful game. So you see black here, pardon me, Lev Pashkish took the knight on c6, which is not a good move, and here Judith Porglar from this point on, really a great tactician, found really great way how to get out of this mess. B takes c6, then after queen to d4, bishop to e7 was played, bishop to g5, not a problem, because after bishop to e6 now the serious threat was to move c5, and from this point on black has, I think, really a beautiful game. So you should not take out the knight here, as I said. In this on c6, the best way after potential c takes d4 is simply to take out the bishop on g4. After here d takes c3, we'd simply take out the knight, and probably if you continue the game you will find I think the best next couple of moves. So what black could do also after move knight to e5 is to move bishop to f5, but again it's, I think, nothing special here. Again, you may get worried about the square d4. What you should do is realize that this game could go maybe an isolated pawn game. So here in my opinion, bishop to e3 is perfectly fine, because if c takes d4, we take. It's not a problem here to lose the bishop here, because after knight to d4, queen to d4, we can notice now that we have now really great attack around the square d5, and also the d5 will be a long-term weakness. It's an isolated pawn. We can castle, then we can play rook to d1. We'll continue simply our pressure around the square d5, and I think black could face many position problems afterwards. So as I said, this is now the key moment. After move c takes d4, not to take here on c6, you should take on g4, and then here afterwards knight takes f6. So this is now our first example. I think you can really have a decent game after move knight to e5. In my opinion, it's really one of the best methods. But what you could also do after move bishop to g4 is maybe to play bishop to g5. The game is slightly wilder, because here if black tries, for instance, bishop to f3, it's not such a huge problem, because after bishop to f3 and knight to d4, the problem is this line, bishop to d5, and still I think white has a beautiful game, because of course you cannot take out the bishop. And the problem I think for black in this particular scenario is that again this is an open game, and the bishops love the open game. with this bishop, centralized bishop on d5, but with the pin here on g5, with the opportunity to maybe even kick away the knight from the center of the board, fast castling, a rook to c1, queen to c2. So again, I think white would have here really a beautiful setup. So here, after move bishop to g5, what black could do maybe is again simplify the position in the center of the board without playing the move bishop to f3. But if black does it, of course, then we can get out of this positional idea, bishop to f3, and then we can take out here the pawn on d4. And again, we have created a normal position that happened now many times in some Rubinstein systems, in the classical system that we have analyzed before. Basically what we got here is the battle against an isolated pawn. So we have created the blockade. The best way against an isolated pawn is, of course, to create a blockade. And I think this is a powerful blockade because the knight is protecting that square, the queen is protecting the square, and even the bishop can be included here with the move bishop to e3, because the problem about the move bishop to g4 is if we play bishop to e3, then you cannot use this g4 square in order to attack the bishop on e3. So from this point on, I think again white has a good game. It's nothing special. Okay, maybe white doesn't have a huge advantage in which white is winning the game for sure, but I think white got out of this positional mess. So that's why I like a little bit more this knight to e5 method. It's more dynamic, it's a more attacking method. Here after move knight to e5, I wanted to show you really huge mistake that black made here, which you can also exploit if that happens to you, because this is now an international master level. So white was the grandmaster, but black was an international master. Here we have a game between Alexei Alexandrov against Sergei Begun, and here you see a really common mistake that happens, I think, when you're a beginner or something, because one of the worst move that you can make in an opening is the pawn move. So you should try to avoid as many as possible of this pawn move. So you should try to develop your minor pieces without playing with your pawns so much. Of course you have to use your pawns, but you should not play them so often, because you have to develop your minor pieces, you have to secure the king, and sometimes a pawn move can be a loss of tempo. And you see now after move bishop to g5, here black tried now the move h6, kicking away the bishop, but now after move bishop to f6, the whole position is falling apart. After queen to f6, we have now this one here. White didn't want even to take here. Now the c7 is the weakness. You see how the position can get messed up if you don't secure the king very early. So now knight to c7 is a serious threat. Here black tried queen to e5, but now f4, simply kicking away the queen, queen to b8, knight to d5, and from this point on the game was simply over. So as I said, this is also, I think, important study. Here you can play, of course, sometimes the move h6, but you should consider if your king is secured. Let's go back. Instead of this move h6, of course, black needs to play bishop to e7, or maybe even bishop to c5 would be slightly more aggressive. But from this point on, we would have, I think, the most common position that can happen in the Tarrasch defense. So let's see now another example. Again, we have this move bishop to g4 here. Again, this move bishop to g5. After bishop to f3, and knight to d4, we have now this idea. We have analyzed now this line, bishop to d5, bishop to e7, and now bishop to f6. I think still a beautiful way here to play from white's perspective. I think if you want to go positionally into the game, then this idea is perfectly fine. This is a great method, but still I kind of like more this knight to e5, the sharper line. After move bishop to f6, we have now casting, maybe casting, and now with the move e3, this knight can be kicked away. If black, for instance, plays something like knight to e6, then you can play queen to b3, and see now we have a beautiful double attack. Maybe something like queen to e7 can happen, but now knight to e4 is also a beautiful move. Now we can even at least, but what we can create here, I think, is a weak pawn on e6. You see the c5 is weak, so I think from this point on, again, white has a pleasant game. So this is also a perfect line. I think if you don't want to complicate things too much, I think it's also a great method how to beat the Tarrasch defense. So what black could also do after move, what white could do is maybe this line, bishop to e3, which I kind of don't like, to bring the bishop immediately, although it's threatening, of course, immediately d takes c5, but maybe you could face this idea c4, and then after castling bishop to f3, then bishop to f3. Okay, still black has some worries about the d5 square, but then the game transposes maybe into some b5, b4 ideas here, into some pawn majority attacks. This is again playable. I wanted to show you, of course, also now winning game here from white's perspective. It was a gameplay by Carl Gilg against Paul Joner, and here white, I think, showed a brilliant way how to play now with the bishop here, although I kind of don't like this method because you're bringing your bishop really on a weird square in front of the pawn, in front of the e-pawn. As I said, still white is much better here, but I simply like the most this knight to e5 idea in the beginning. So here, after move h6, queen to c2 was played, queen to d7, and now b3. This is a very popular method how to play against the Tarrasch defense, because you want to break here the space advantage that black has built. So here bishop to e7, we have b takes c4, we have now d takes c4, and here after queen to a4, you see white can really create some dangerous pressure here around the square c6. We can include the rook into the game. So from this point on, again, it was the one-way ticket and white won the game. But okay, let's go back to this recommendation. After move bishop to g4, in my opinion, one of the best methods is this sharp line, knight to e5. Let's repeat, if knight takes d4 happens, then we take knight takes g4, knight takes g4, and then e3. This is a beautiful trap, I think, that you can use. And if, of course, something like c takes d4 happens, then you take knight takes g4, then d takes c3, you take, b takes c3. Okay, black has this intermediate check, bishop to d2, queen to f6, but now after castling, this is a brilliant position for the bishop here. Such an open game. You have the bishops, you have a target d5, you have a target b7, the c6 knight could be also weak, rook to c1 is an opportunity, bishop to c3, and afterwards even some rook to e1 ideas. So I think this is the perfect position for a dynamic player. So okay, I hope that you realize these ideas, and I hope that you use one of these methods in order to beat the Wagner variation of the Tarrasch defense. So as I said, if you're playing the Tarrasch defense from black's perspective, please avoid the Wagner variation, because I think a stronger opponent would destroy you for sure with the white pieces. So that's why there are plenty beautiful lines like the Rubinstein variation, classical variation, I think, that you can play that we have also analyzed before. So as I said, these are maybe slightly better lines than this Wagner variation. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you want to study the Tarrasch defense more, check out our analysis so far with some great ideas, and for white and for black. And if you have worries maybe to play as black, check out my hyper accelerated ranks in the defense series as the good response to e4, and my Nimzo in the defense series as a good response to d4. And of course, if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.